Look, will you be absolutely genuine with me? No deception, please. I want you to do something that expresses you without the slightest deception.
Guys, welcome back. Today's episode is going to be an interesting one. It's not going to be about bro science, which a lot of people, when we start talking about it, think it might be. As a full disclaimer, none of us are registered doctors, dietitians, nutritionists. All we're here to do is educate the public on facts, what we know to be true, and most importantly, what has worked for the three of us sitting up here that has gotten us into our pinnacle and most optimal peak of health. So I'm going to start this off a little polarizing. If your mother had told you to ever eat vegetables growing up, she's an idiot. If anyone is continuously telling you that, they're all idiots. And this dates back to over 180 years ago. So it might sound a little conspiracy theorist, but let's get right into it. The demonization of meat came from a woman named Ellen G. White. Ellen G. White was a young woman who wound up bumping her noggin, got a concussion, and during her time of unconsciousness, she was visited by the Holy Spirit, who told her that meat was in fact evil and came straight from the devil. Ellen G. White wound up starting the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which nowadays is tied to thousands of medical institutions, thousands of colleges, and thousands upon thousands of different churches across the country. Ellen G. White, through her years, wound up spreading this knowledge about how veganism is the way and that the only food that should be eaten by people are vegetables, fruits, nuts, and most importantly, grains. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is also the starting stigma that created what we all know to be an absolute fallacy, the food pyramid, where they have such things as essential grains, which does not exist in the human anatomy. As years progressed, Lena Cooper then wound up becoming the chief directional officer for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and she wound up starting what is now known today as the National Academy of Nutrition and Academia. This is the largest organization across the entire world of quote-unquote health professionals and dietitians that all push this agenda for how meat is evil and how the only thing that the human body should consume is vegetables. Now, for those who are unaware of the detriment that vegetables cause, they are probably the most harmful thing that human beings can eat. They are filled with saponins, they are filled with toxins, lectins, oxalates, and so many other different types of components that the plants use in order to preserve themselves from being eaten, which do nothing for the body besides damage gut health. Now, the stigma has gone on years after, which has then led into different types of cardiologists and doctors like Ansel Keys, which, Taylor, you know a little bit about Ansel Keys.
Yeah, he was a physician maybe in the 70s. I don't know the exact timeline, but the moral of the story is that there's science for anything. You can prove anything through science if you use junky science, which most science is junky science. Ansel Keys was a big part of the Framingham study, which was just epidemiological science, which basically means it's not really science. You're not like testing something or experimenting something. You just kind of look at two different things and you just associate them together. And what mainstream health guidelines do is they say this causes that, so they'll take a subsect of people and it might not be representative of even the general population. They might just choose a very small select group of people from a specific area. And they will a lot of times just ask them a question. They don't really even necessarily observe anything. They just might ask them something. And they will find two dots and they'll connect them together. So in the Ansel Keys case, they used shitty epidemiological science to say that cholesterol is bad and that basically to demonize meat and to demonize animal fats. So a big part of that study was trying to persuade the population to get away from saturated fat, which is the fat that would be commonly found in animal meat, And instead, we ended up replacing that with trans fat, actually, which is now not even allowed to be in food anymore. But subsequently, polyunsaturated fats, which would mostly be found through seed oils and non-animal based fats like olive oils and things like that, which is another story. But
it's a story that kind of segues into why we're doing what we're doing today. For those of you who don't know what a polyunsaturated fat, Taylor said something about seed oils, which we're going to get into today. Seed oils, for those of you who don't know what they are: palm oil, canola oil, safflower oil, grapeseed oil, sunflower oil, and the list goes on. And after this implementation of these polyunsaturated fats, like Procter & Gamble, who created Crisco, which is a vegetable oil made from canola and palm oil, 1977, there has been a 3 times uptick in none other than cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attacks.
It was a motor lubricant at first, right?
Yeah.
So most seed oils were.
Even before I get into those statistics, the canola oil came from none other came from Canada, right, during World War II, because they are a useless country that just needed to add something to the war. And what they wound up doing was sending us over canola oil, known as Canada oil, which was used to grease the engines in our tanks. So that's what you guys are putting into your fucking body. Going back, as these seed oils were implemented into our diet, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attacks, cancer, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disorders, they all skyrocketed by 3x in the last 50, 60.
The 20s, 30s,
they didn't exist. So if you go back 100 years,
there is no chronic illness.
There's no chronic illness. There's no autoimmune disease. Heart attack was few and far in between.
So what's autoimmune? Like for people like gout, Crohn's
yes, but
disease,
autoimmune would be like a rheumatoid arthritis, things like that.
I think by definition, it would mean your immune system essentially is attacking itself.
Okay. Correct. Now, that ties into what a metabolic health condition is. So a lot of your autoimmune disease, whether you guys understand this or not, and my mother watches every single episode, and I love my mom more than anything in this world, but she's also a bit of an idiot, and she's one of those women that I was talking about at the beginning of this episode. She finally has come around to understanding that the things that she was eating throughout her life wound up making her much sicker. So God bless my mother. She's in the food store now. She's turning everything around and looking at it. And a lot of her ailments seem to wind up regressing a little bit. Your metabolic health stems down to everything that you put into your mouth. A lot of people feel that what they eat has no correlation to their health whatsoever. But explain to me why 1 out of every 3 people in the United States is morbidly obese now. Your brain does not dictate your health. Your health starts by what you put into your mouth. Your gut health is your first brain. If this is not in check, this will never be in check. And that's what people simply just don't understand nowadays. You have 2 brains in your head, your stomach and then your brain. And all these leafy greens, going back to what we were talking about vegetables. These vegetables do not want to be eating these cruciferous green leafy vegetables. They are malnourishing to the human body. They prevent iodine absorption, which means that you actually cannot absorb the proper nutrients. And everything that we eat comes down to the bioavailability of to what we put into our mouth. Now, we've all done many different diets up here. So again, a lot of people are going to look at us and think bro science. Everything that we're about to say, it's just things that you can look up. These are all facts and statistics that you can wind up going on the internet.
Do your own research.
Do your own research. I'd wind up trying not to use Google because we all know who owns Google. So try and do your own independent case studies. But Mike, you yourself, we all kind of follow the same diet now, but you have been through many different diets, I assume, right? So what you're doing now is literally what I'm doing now, and what you're doing is more...
I think it's similar.
Similar?
Balanced lifestyle. Right?
Balanced lifestyle.
Yeah.
But you have done...
I've been straight carnivore for 9 months at one point. I've done ketogenic diet. I've done Atkins diet. I've done paleo.
And I want to go over today on a bunch of like your experiences with them, because I feel like, going from last episode of the physical body, I feel if I'm not going to the gym, I eat like shit. Since I started my diet in January, it's been 8 months. Now, if I don't go to the gym for 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 days if I'm traveling, I feel just as good day 8 eating the way I've been eating. Where in the past, if I'm telling you, if I was off for 2 days, my whole body mutated within like 48 hours. And I'm even with the supraspinatus tear, we went real half-ass in the gym for like those 6 weeks. I didn't lose a pound.
Yeah, I don't think most people realize that. Like, as a trainer, I always say, because usually the number one goal that they have when they come in and see me when I ask them is that they want to lose weight and they want to look good, basically. And so I really, as a trainer, I like to separate your physical practice is meant for gaining muscle, and then you need to create calorie deficit for weight loss. So it's silly to me to try to use the gym as the reason that you'll lose weight, because you don't really need to have a very prominent physical practice to be lean and right. to feel good. I think that's all going to come from your diet. And obviously the physical practice would be to build muscle, to get your body moving, and all the other benefits to it. But I think we conflate them together, and there's a reason why that doesn't work, because you can go to the gym for an hour and you just don't burn that many calories. And it's very important to hold muscle because that's going to help your metabolic rate. But otherwise, I think everybody tries to kill 2 birds in one stone, and we end up killing no birds. So as far as eating healthy goes, I think the point that I'd like to make is that the number one way that you can get healthier is to be leaner. It can come through eating healthier. It has to basically come through, I don't even want to say eating healthier. It has to come through eating less calories. And I know there's like a conceptual kind of diet that you can follow, which is kind of like what I tried to help you with, where it's more overarching themes about whole foods and basically trying to reverse engineer satiety. So eating lots of food volume and getting full but not eating lots of calories is the way that any diet works. So I know that there's other purported benefits to ketogenic diet and to carnivore diet, and every diet will give you other benefits, but intermittent fasting included, things like that. The number one thing that diets work, the reason why they work is because they create calorie deficit, and some of them work better than others and get better results than others because it's easier to get in a calorie deficit. And that's why whole foods work way better than a processed food diet, because meat and fruit, they're
eggs,
butter, any whole foods,
butter,
are going to have much less calories per volume of food than a packaged food, where a crumble cookie can have 1,000 calories to it and it's eaten in 2 bites, versus the pound of meat, can have 500 calories to it for 16 ounces and 4 meals worth of food. So I think the number one point as far as nutrition and dieting goes is you got to follow a diet that you can adhere to. A lot of
lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of people listening that are going to be coming from a place of not really ever having tried maybe any diet before and just basically eating the standard American diet, it's going to be too much of a jump for them to try to go into something that's very, very extreme. And I tried this many times before as somebody that's given a lot of advice on health and nutrition and helping people to lose weight.
Do you think that the carnivore diet is an extreme diet, though?
What is the carnivore? The carnivore diet, it technically is just meat.
It's whole
cutting
eggs.
out food groups is extreme to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's all meat.
It's all
you have to understand
eggs,
where they're
nutrition.
coming from. It's
Correct.
For somebody that's eating maybe 2 to 4 ounces of meat a day at best, to go into a diet where you're only eating meat is extreme for them.
Yeah.
That I can understand.
And the body, I feel like another thing I want to just touch on is so with Dr. Gary Brecker and a friend of mine, Dr. Rosado, who will be on the show in the future, they do something called a methylation test.
Yeah.
So what this is, and it's good out there, it's like $500. They ship it to your house. It's a swab, but it breaks down, like you said, there's 2 brains, and everything is based out of the gut. And what methylation is you eat something, and it what's the word? Like breaks down in your stomach into a gas, and the gas methylates into your body. And there's tons of studies where, like for example, going off of like blood pressure. You know, a lot of people think that it's, you know, all these different statins and medicines, when really you could take a methylation test, and one of the big underachieved supplements is something called DHEA. And when you're low on DHEA and vitamin D3 and vitamin K, which your genetic test would show you, you actually take the gas and it actually hiccups in your, it like tickles your arteries, and it hiccups these veins, which spasms your arteries, and it looks like you have this high blood pressure. And as soon as you start properly supplementing the DHEA, the vitamin D, it goes right away. It goes away right away. And it's something good to look into if someone really wants to get serious into the diets before they just jump into a carnivore. So for example, I have like something called hemochromatosis, which is where
I suffered for years.
My body doesn't digest iron, right? So you were always taught, I was, meat. So I eat vegetables, and I used to have a high vegetable-based diet. I used to count my calories, and bro, I would be, so a high iron, to give you an idea, the hematocrit is like, let's call it 50-51 is high. 60, you can't even give blood. I've walked in at 62, where New York Blood Center sent me away. And then I switched over to this carnivore-based diet. But my LDL, I'm 39. My LDL has been the lowest it's ever been since I'm 26. Yeah. You know, we'll go into like detail of that, but I do agree with like cutting out everything fully is a little extreme. And people hear this carnivore diet, and like I considered this a carnivore diet because it was a very grass-fed beef was the staple of it. But I did put in organic fruits, and we'll get a little bit into the diet later. But I do. Why do you think it's so extreme? Like, why do you need like a little sprinkle of everything? You think like you think it touches, like, how did your body work?
We're
like,
not hunter gatherers anymore.
Right.
So I mean, previously we would have just eaten whatever was available, and obviously the payoff from catching a large, we were apex predators as humans. We killed the largest animals. Were the best kill because you can feed the most people with it. Realistically, there wasn't as much availability for fruits and vegetables because they had to grow naturally. I mean, until the point where we learned to farm. But we would just eat whatever was available, and realistically, the meat was the most readily available source of calories. Ian mentioned before bioavailability, and I'm just tying it back to, you just kind of mentioned iron. There's vitamins that come from plants, and there's vitamins that come from animals, and even you mentioned D and K2. Some vitamins can only be found in animals, and there are other things like iron which can be found in plants. And the argument is that they're different forms, essentially. Right. So for every vitamin that you can think of, there are different forms of it. And when we synthesize it, if you read your vitamin label, it would tell you what that element or vitamin is attached to. So even something like maybe magnesium would be magnesium citrate or magnesium glycinate.
Yeah,
so
right.
it's essentially attached to carriers. A lot of times in plants, the vitamins are kind of, I guess, bound up in a matrix almost. And though we're eating iron when we eat spinach, it's not available to us to use for its bodily
which is why it stays
components.
In your body.
Yeah, so it kind of
sense.
takes the place a lot of times of an animal sourced iron, which would be like heme iron, versus an iron that would be found in a plant, which would be more of like an elemental iron.
Yeah.
So when people are supplementing iron, you're usually legitimately supplementing metal, almost like iron shavings,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of times it's like oxidized rust versions of this mineral, and we just call iron. So it can be really confusing to think, how could I be low in iron or high in iron? I'm taking iron and I'm doing what my doctor says to do with iron, but I think the problem a lot of times is it's not the right form for us, for our human operating system to be able to extract that vitamin or mineral out of the source, the plant source or the food source that we're eating it. And that's where I think carnivore maybe can shine over, say, a plant-based diet, is I think the vitamins and minerals are a lot more readily available when you eat them from animal sources than plant
answer,
sources.
Bro.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, so that like you said, it ties into the
so much.
bioavailability as to how the body can process and break everything down. If you and I were to go outside and go bury our mouth in dirt outside, you and I could still extract zinc, magnesium, and iron from eating dirt. Yeah. That's just how it is. But if you look at the bioavailability of how we can absorb those certain nutrients, when you go online and you look at spinach, kale, for example, it tells you can get your magnesium, your iron through this. Fine. Statistically, though, you only get 5% of what the total volume of that iron actually is. You can't absorb all of that because our body's not meant to intake it that way. Yeah. When you go to a meat like steak, beef, do you know what the bioavailability percent of that is? 90% your body can take in those nutrients. That's the importance. You actually made a comment before. I didn't know that you suffered from hemochromatosis.
Oh, bro, it's crippling. And the doctor I dealt with knew it as soon as I walked in.
So that's the thing, when I dealt with hemochromatosis for 8 years of my life to the point where I actually almost died. And that's not an exaggeration. For those of you who know me back from my old gym when I was bodybuilding, you said that you had a 62. I was at 71. My blood wasn't circulating. So I was at my Tampa Pro show, and I wound up fainting, just out cold. They could not pull blood from my body.
Yeah, I put an 18 gauge in my arm and it won't come out.
They couldn't pull blood from my body. And if I didn't go to the hospital and do an emergency phlebotomy, my heart would have just given out.
Stopped,
and I was only 26 years old at the time. So I suffered from hemochromatosis for years, and every doctor was like, don't eat steak, don't do this.
That's all I got, red meat.
Yeah, don't eat vegetables, chicken, lean. Now, mind you, and I think it's important because before we started, we were actually just kind of communicating and conversing about all the different diets that we've done. I've done the bodybuilding diet. I've done the no fat at all. Fat is evil in bodybuilding. You can't have fat. Right. You're allowed to have a sprinkle of olive oil, maybe, or a quarter of an avocado, but they want you to eat nothing but grains, rice, lean chicken, lean this, lean that. I suffered, and I couldn't understand why my LDL and my triglycerides were so high. It just didn't make any sense because I wasn't eating anything to tack onto that fat. Once I came off the bodybuilding diet and I went on to this carnivore diet, I tried the paleo. I never did Atkins. I tried vegan, vegetarian. That's when I was the unhealthiest when I was doing vegan for 3 months. All of a sudden, when I said, fuck it, let me try this carnivore thing a year ago, my cholesterol plummeted. Yep. LDL plummeted. Triglycerides plummeted. My hemochromatosis, eating nothing but steak. Every doctor, now mind you, I went to 4 different doctors to go over my hemochromatosis. Apparently, I was stuck with this forever. I was never getting rid of it. False. Everything the doctors told me not to do, I did. And I wound up healing myself just from eating food.
I've been over 47 since January when I started.
Bro, when I go and give blood now, because now they do like your actual iron level at the New York Blood Center, there were days where I would go in and I was at 29, which is literally knock, knock on death's door. Yeah. And I would go home.
Just so you know, that's a third. So 29 is 72.
Right, exactly.
So for someone who doesn't know the reading.
Thank you.
So 60 is 20 is you're not allowed to give blood at 20. They send you to the emergency room.
Now I'm at 14.
So 29 is fucking
Now I'm at 14 when I go in.
Yeah.
Every time I go in, I'm at 14, and I'm like, this is amazing. If I prick
how do your joints feel, bro?
Amazing,
now, right?
Like and that's the thing.
So for make a fist.
The longest time, and so many old bodybuilder friends that I have suffer from this, where their ligaments, their joints, everything is tight, compressed. They can't open. There's no mobility. There's no suppleness. They're not realizing that they're just not incorporating the proper food into their diet. I remember I took this girl out on a date. You know when you're sitting across from somebody and you just want to throw your food at them because they're an idiot? This girl was just consistently telling me how horrific fat is for the human body.
Because she read about it.
Because her bodybuilding coach told her, never have fat. It's evil. It's evil. It's like Ellen G. White with meat being evil. All these bodybuilding
I think
coaches.
Something that's important to note about bodybuilding is there's a difference between being healthy and being skinny.
Yes.
So, like I said before, it is the most important thing that you can become lean, because when you have large amounts of fat and visceral fat around your organs, that is going to be the most associated metric with disease and disorder. So getting lean is, to me, the number one priority that you need to follow.
Do you think that you can get lean eating the exact same thing but less.
Yeah.
So
I think by definition, calories are what is important. You need to burn more calories than you eat. And then that's where a diet comes in, because whether you're tracking the calories themselves or you're just conceptually eating better foods, the reason that the diet is going to make you lose weight is because you're intaking less energy than you're expending, just from like a physics standpoint. So I just think it's important to make a distinction between helping somebody lose weight and trying to get somebody healthy.
that's actually a very good point. But so let me ask,
Because fat is very
well,
important.
there's such thing as an essential fat. Your
Right.
body
We have
can't live
essential
without
fat, we have essential amino acids.
Yeah, and you have no essential carbs.
We don't necessarily have essential carbs, but carbohydrate, glucose is the energy source
that
for the
is the
brain,
pathway,
and it's
and I
very
learned that
important.
quick.
If you
That
don't
I
eat them,
understand.
you'll actually just take protein, and your body will break them down. It will create sugar from the
Correct.
protein.
Right.
So do you need to essentially eat them? No. But your body wants them, and it will create them at a cost
Right.
if
So
you
why
don't
cut
eat
them
them.
out if you still
Well,
need
for me,
them?
I'm like, why not eat them?
Right.
But granted, there's a lot of different populations. You know, it's hard to give a general health advice, because a lot of this general advice is meant for general population, and then you have athletes that are going to follow this advice. You have skinny people that are going to follow this advice. You have obese people that are going to follow this advice. And truthfully, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to them. So going back to fat, the whole point of bodybuilding is to get as little fat on your body as you can.
Correct.
Fat also carries the most energy per gram. Protein has 4 calories per gram. Carbohydrates have 4, and fat has 9. So if you want to burn fat, it makes sense to eat less of it, because that's essentially what you're trying to burn. There's a physician named Ted Naiman who has I really like his philosophy. It's called the PE ratio. It's protein to energy ratio. So you have your 3 macronutrients. You have protein, and you also have carbohydrates and fat. Protein is kind of like, in his eyes, it's your really essential way to support your muscles and to get the amino acids that are going to be building blocks for your body. And then you have carbohydrates and fat, which he just defines as energy sources. So that same bodybuilder can eat a lot of fat and less carbohydrates and still become lean from it. But I think from an athletic standpoint, carbohydrates are really important for our energy systems, for how we produce, when we're producing force, when we're running, when we're lifting weights. Carbohydrates are a really readily available source of fuel. So for me as an athlete, and somebody that's physical, when I have athletes that are asking me about dietary advice, I think protein is very, very important, because the whole, they're trying to support their muscle mass. That's kind of like non-negotiable to me. And then I prefer to get energy from carbohydrates over fat. Granted, fat, going back to kind of Ansel Keys, cholesterol is actually very important for us. It's very important for our sex hormones. It's a very important part of our cell membranes. So the demonization of cholesterol, I would just implore people to look up on their own. Cholesterol is, I think you'd very quickly realize that it's been demonized way beyond
it's a fact.
where it should
you can
be.
look it up. Yeah, they change it from 300 to 200.
LDL and HDL, and
Yeah.
it gets very confusing after a while. And I said before we started, I don't want to go deep on it because I'm not the most knowledgeable person on.
Right.
I think there are little hacks that you can do to increase one and decrease the other, and it doesn't mean that you're becoming healthier and supporting your body in the way that it needs to be. But I think there's a lot of ways that you can become lean, and there's a lot of ways that you can become healthy. And I'm not of the opinion that vegetables are the absolute worst thing that you can put in your body. I know factually they do have components, and this whole idea kind of goes back to the defense mechanisms. So as animals have talons and claws, and they have lots of ways that they can protect themselves.
Correct.
Vegetables don't really have any way that they can protect themselves. And when we think about vegetables, they're actually usually leaves, stems, and roots, versus fruits, which are actually transporters of the seed for the plant itself. So a ripe fruit really wants to be eaten, which is why it's sweet and colorful. It wants to be eaten because we're going to help, or an animal is going to help transport its seed and continue the life of the fruit. Versus a vegetable just wants to be alive. The root and the stem and the leaf, it doesn't want to get eaten, because you're not going to help pass the vegetable on if you eat it.
Correct.
It doesn't have a seed in it. And by definition, a fruit and a vegetable, fruits have the seed in it and the vegetable doesn't. So I don't think that they're the worst thing ever. They do have phytates, lectins, oxalates, and negative defense chemicals to them. I think the catch-22 comes from an interesting relationship that the human body has to stress, where sometimes negative and stressful things can build resilience in us, and they actually become net positive for us to expose ourselves to little bits of stress. And there's even some interesting studies about like radioactivity and things like that, where little doses of these things might actually end up being beneficial
like
for us.
drinking snake venom, like
Right, so
periodically to make
little bits
yourself
of
immune
bad
to it.
can actually be good, and just like they say with the doses in the poison. So I know I've had a coach that's a really high, way stronger than me, way faster than me, and he's purely vegan. So I do know vegans that have made it work. I think from an objective standpoint for the general population, or even just the general intermediate or even advanced athlete that's listening, if you, I would say, reverse engineer the diet. You know, how you want to feel good, but you want to be full, and that's how you're going to be able to lose weight. You want to be full, you want to fuel your performance. It doesn't make as much sense to try to do that through vegetables, just because from a pure like volume standpoint, like a vegan would make argument for some certain protein sources like tofu or beans or things like that. The amount that you have to eat of those foods to get the same amount of protein that you would eat in a small amount of meat, or the same amount of minerals, iron, it's not really that realistic. And I think going back to kind of digestion, it's like an energy expending kind of process to digest food. So it makes the most sense to try to eat things that are going to be very easily digestible, and eat the lowest volume of them that you have to as to not burden yourself with having to digest all of these fibrous elements of plant matter, basically. So I think that's where vegetables have their downside. I think we've been definitely taught that they're the best thing, and honestly, the most of the time when people are trying to lose weight and they're trying to get healthy, it's more like about what they're not eating versus about what they are eating, for the most part. So I've never met anyone that vegetables are their downfall. I have met plenty of people that don't understand why they're not losing weight, because I'm eating a salad every day. I don't understand. I'm like, this you're not taking into account any of the energy expenditure or the physics of what it takes to become lean. Like, adding in something is not really going to help you lose weight. Adding in leafy greens, there's not really a mechanism why that's going to help you
taking away the McDonald's
become lean, right? Because you know, it's all the things that you're eating that are giving you massive doses of calories, and a lot of those foods, not coincidentally, have very low levels of nutrition. Like that crumble cookie is going to give you 1,000 calories, but in terms of the vitamin, the mineral profile, the fats that it's going to be made with, there's not really going to be any there. And you mentioned Procter and Gamble and vegetable shortening. Like, we were always, a long while back, we ate tallow and lard, and then we got brainwashed into believing that those were actually, you know, through the Framingham study and through lots of crummy epidemiological science that just took random groups of people and said they ate a burger and they had a heart attack, so the burger caused a heart attack, not taking into account any other lifestyle factors that these people were dealing with. And especially in our modern day, we're bombarded with a million and one things that are going to make us sick and unhealthy.
People are going to be confused by what tallow actually is. So
it's fat from the animal.
Exactly. I just wanted you to say that so that people actually understood. You have ghee butter and tallow, duck fat butter, things like that.
Duck fat.
Duck fat's incredible.
Amazing.
So just so nobody was confused, tallow actually, fat per fat, is the highest amount of fat source that you can get from a butter.
You can actually make it too. It's the filtered fat from the meat.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
You could cook it and
all the when you kill an
afterwards.
animal, it has obviously bones to it. It has a bunch of flesh to it.
But it has fat.
And it has a lot of fat to it,
Right.
and then it has organs and other things like that. But yeah, essentially you're just collecting, trimming that fat, and then there's fat. You know, like suet is like a fat around the fat web around the kidneys, I believe. But yeah, there's sourced fat that we can get from animals, and previously we would have used those sources of fat for our cooking, to fry things and things like that. And due to us believing that those things were actually causing us disease, we started to replace them with plant fats, or even synthesized, trans fats, which are basically like almost lab made in a sense.
Correct.
Like
And we were using waste seed oils that were like waste products at one point, and we were substituting those for animal fats, which are, per gram a lot higher in these bioavailable sources of essential fatty acids and vitamins and minerals. So I think that that's a big reason where we went wrong. So not to demonize, I don't want the message to be to demonize vegetables, because I do think for anybody listening, that's not their downfall, is that they're eating vegetables. Their downfall is that they're eating probably the wrong kinds of fat, and they're eating very high calorie dense foods, and from a nutrition standpoint, they're getting very little amounts of essential, and essential means that you need them, and you need to consume them. So we're just eating processed foods, and I want to be clear too that a lot of foods need to be processed, which there's not necessarily a definition from it, but a lot of those foods aren't even foods. We just
it's processed. You said at the gym one time, unless you're killing it in your backyard, cutting it and putting it in the oven.
Right. This is the point that I'm making.
It has to be processed.
Right. So I think we say that has chemicals and that's processed, and like every chemical, has a really bad stigma to it, but chemicals don't signify something bad, and processing doesn't signify something bad.
But that's different than like the processed meat that you're getting in Stop and Shop,
like
where they're
pumping
the steak with chemicals.
But the reason isn't the processing. The reason is the raising of the animal.
Right.
So it'd be really cool to have on maybe like a holistic farmer or something on here at one point. Because if you take a Stop and Shop steak and a steak that was raised on a farm, from a calorie standpoint, and this is why I said before, it's important to kind of separate getting lean versus eating healthy, because from a caloric standpoint,
I want to get into this.
These foods are going to have
they're twins.
Comparable. You're not really going to be able to tell them apart from a label. From a deeper look to them, they are going to have different amounts of the fatty acids, the omega-3 and the omega-6, and the profiles of the vitamins, and possibly, or not possibly, but a lot of the toxins from a factory farmed animal versus a pastured animal are going to be different. And then you can even take that to a spiritual standpoint, where a cow that's traumatized from sitting in a pen and not seeing daylight and having to beat its own shit versus a cow that's been loved and gets to eat grass and gets to roam around with its cattle and is killed humanely, like those might have different downstream effects that way. But from a nutritional standpoint, there are going to be some differences to them. But I think for somebody that's starting the journey, not everybody can afford grass-fed meat. So I do think you have to you have to have steps to changing your life and changing your diet. And from somebody that's been in the field trying to help people, and from somebody that was very gung-ho at one point on organic and grass-fed and really great sourcing, it falls apart a lot of times when you try to prescribe that, because again, either people can't find it, they can't afford it, it's not as convenient. Depending on where you live, you may not even be able to find it around. You may have to order it online.
Let me ask you a question rolling off of that. So someone watched the podcast last week. They hit the gym for the first time. Now it's been 10 days. Like, all right, this is awesome, but what do I eat? And now they're watching this episode. What's the easiest tips you can get rolled into like a little bit more advanced tip of what you would tell someone right now of, hey, I just came out of the dark. I listened to this podcast. I'm in the gym. Now what do I eat? Like, what's an easy cookie cutter basis for them to start at?
Well, this I think segues probably into our calorie counting versus conceptual eating kind of two sides, argument or debate maybe. But going back to skinny versus healthy. So we can kind of compare two different meals. Meal A has whole eggs, a ribeye steak, chicken thighs. If you want to throw some plants in there, it has avocado, it has mango. Compare that to another equally healthy on paper meal that has egg whites, it has a filet mignon, it has berries and maybe lower sugar fruit. If you looked at both of those on paper, you would say, like, both of those should help you lose weight, right? But from a caloric standpoint, that first meal that I described is going to be a lot heavier in calories, dense in calories than that second meal is going to be. So this is why I feel like calorie counting it's important to understand. And I think if for people that have never done it before, I think it's a very eye-opening experience to be able to look at two foods that are seemingly the same, like a chicken breast and a chicken thigh, and understand the difference between them, even though they're both chicken, or a ribeye steak and a lean cut of steak,
Right, yeah.
even though they're both steak.
Or an
fucking
egg and an
mind-blowing.
egg
You know,
white,
it's very
'cause those
different.
differences are massive.
99.1 beef, if you can even find it, or 97.3,
Right.
or
80-20.
Right.
Yeah.
They have a very, look at the back of the label. They have a
Significant
really, really
Yeah.
different calorie count
Just
and
a
fat
ribeye
count to
fillet.
them. Right.
Yeah.
So
Night and day.
if you just tell people things conceptually, for most people it's going to work because fat, animal proteins, fruits, it's really hard to overeat them. If you've ever tried to gain weight and you've tried to only use whole foods, it's really hard because you get very full, and
It's what I'm
even
actually trying to do
carnivore
right now.
can be really tough, and
Dude.
that's why I got off it, to be honest, because I could not put on any size.
It's
Really, I was
impossible.
too full. I was eating 3, 4, 5 pounds of meat a day.
Yeah.
And for the amount that I was exercising, I wasn't able to really be at maintenance or in surplus from just eating these foods. They're too satiating. Like I'm too full. I don't want to keep eating them, and that's a really helpful thing for people that are trying to lose weight. So I think that's conceptually why it's really helpful to say, you know, start eating whole foods, start incorporating more animal proteins, eat more fruits instead of processed sugars like candies and things that you would find in packages and on
Anything
shelves.
that's man-made. that was,
Correct,
like,
because
in
from
the
a calorie
factory,
standpoint,
it's a wasted calorie.
Do you mind
Correct.
if I tap into that just for
Absolutely,
very
yeah.
quickly? So there's also just a very quick note. Even when you eat something, your body has two different mechanisms to break down your insulin. No matter what you eat, your insulin spikes and is used for two things. One, it's going to be used for energy, which Taylor has been going over, and that is where it ties into how the food is going to be burned. And if you're eating something that's spiking your insulin, like he just said, candy, for example, okay, your body then uses that energy and stores it for fat. So when you eat something, your body produces an insulin spike, and then you have two options that come from that: energy utilization, fat.
storage.
Back to you.
I think that was really the point that I want to make. But I don't think most people would. If I said, what do these foods have in common? Bread, rice, cereal, fruit. Even those, some people would say, I have no idea. How is rice the same as fruit? How is bread?
Well, on
related
paper,
to
it's a
fruit?
carb.
Correct. So
But it is such a different.
it is different,
as
but this is
yeah.
why I think calorie counting is really important, because you can begin to look at a plate and you understand, all right, I can pick rice or potato or fruit, and this goes back into the process versus non-process. I just think it's important for you to understand what these things on your plate are going to be giving you from a macronutrient standpoint. And I think a lot of people would look at a plate and they would say, I don't know, like I gave that example before. This one has ribeye, whole egg, chicken thigh, and the other, and you would say, you know, which one's going to help you lose weight? And they say, I don't know. They both look like pretty healthy to me. I think once you've counted calories for a day or a week, or you start to understand that there's going to be a balance that you need to hit, and foods are going to give you more or less of some of these macronutrients, and at the end of the day you need to get into a place where you're going to be at a deficit if you want to become lean. And that's also just why I try to keep separating healthy versus lean, because you can get lean through not a healthy diet. You can get lean eating candy. You can get lean eating McDonald's.
that's
Just off the calorie.
And
Correct.
And
Purely from a
that's
calorie
kind of what I
standpoint.
wanted to kind of go into then. So it's interesting because you have three people up here, and in the previous episodes, a lot of us tend to agree, which is cool. But then in topics like this and conversations, this is where, not that I bounce back at Taylor, but when I eat, I choose, and again, personal preference, of course.
Which goes back, and it's personal preference based off like the methylation.
Of course,
test. It's the way
personal
your DNA
preference
is
based
physically
off of
made.
having my
not 'cause
DNA and the optimal health.
It's not because it tastes like shit. It's
exactly.
a physical
So you
reaction
have
you get from the food.
So you have people that count calories, and a lot of, and again, I don't want to keep using bodybuilders. It's just that's a big focus that I came from in the past. A lot of bodybuilders calorie count on their off season, for example. So you have somebody like me, I don't count calories, but if I choose to fluctuate my weight 10 pounds every month, I can do that just by eating the same 4 foods every single month. I eat whole eggs, steak, cheese, and that's it. I don't need anything else. So when you have this calorie counting method, and I'm glad that you brought up you can lose weight eating candy, the reason why I think this calorie counting method is so detrimental and bad is because you can have people that say, okay, I see the carbs, the berries, the rice, the bread, for example, but now let's go down into how the bread actually affects the gut health with the folic acid, which the human body literally cannot digest, which then causes inflammation.
Or the bleached wheat, or
exactly.
I mean, there's 1,000 things.
So you know what I'm saying? So I look at what you're saying, and everything that you're saying is 100% truth, factual. I can't argue what you're speaking about. The only thing that I can argue with is the health standpoint, the actual epitome of how these things integrate with your optimal health. And when I see people counting calories, personally, I hate it, because I've been out to dinner with people where they're trying to figure out how an espresso martini can factor into their calories,
perfect example.
or how the cheesecake factors into their calories. Or
I think people count McDonald's.
Okay, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or, okay, I'm allowed 6 Oreos a day, so there's my fat, my carbs,
But on
and this.
paper, it's the exact same
On
thing.
paper, it works. And as long as you're hitting those numbers,
You'll lose weight.
you're going to lose weight. For me personally, and again, guys, I just want to say personal opinion, but also fact for
From
how it affects
experience.
your health and experience. I can go and get a bag of sour gummy worms and Oreos and drink a Celsius. I'll eat the same thing every day and lose weight. It doesn't mean that I'm healthy. And that's why I was super happy where you said, are you looking to be healthy or are you looking to lose weight?
Which, like I said before, the most important thing for health outcomes is actually being lean. And going back to kind of carnivore and maybe more extreme approaches, take somebody that's 500 pounds. One of the best interventions you can probably make for them, that, you know, say they drink 10 Coca-Colas a day, one of the best interventions that you can make for them, switch to diet soda. Now, there's lots of other science that would maybe prove why artificial sweeteners aren't good for your gut bacteria and so on and so forth. From a purely caloric standpoint, it's going to help them lose weight and they're going to become healthier from it. Now, maybe it should be a stepwise approach where they go from soda to diet soda and then maybe replacing it with seltzer
carbonated
and maybe naturally flavored beverages and things like that. But I think I just will keep harping on it. Getting lean is the most important. And when you take people that come from a standard American diet, it's not going to be an effective approach to try to get them to say, you know, let me see what you're eating. Oh, no, you can't eat that. You can't eat that. You can't eat that. You can't eat that. Here's what you got to eat. And it's nothing what they ate
And
before.
they hate it, bro.
They're not going to be able to do it. Right, correct.
Oh my God. So my barber, shout out to Vinny, idiot. This kid asks me for 4 weeks, help me get on a diet. Help me get on a diet. I'm like, are you sure you're going to follow it? I promise I'm going to follow it. I put him on the carnivore diet. Oh, I could do this. I was with him the other day, 3 days ago. He came in happy as a pig in shit with this book that Arnold Schwarzenegger endorsed, and it's called something, Why Eating Junk Food is Good for Your Health. And he opens up to a page, and he's like, I couldn't follow this diet, but I'm going to follow this because Arnold Schwarzenegger told me that I can have chicken nuggets from fast food and this and that, and I'm still going to be healthy.
Deficit.
And that goes back to the caloric deficit.
And I think
it's just...
I did the macro counting for a long time.
Yeah.
So it does make sense on paper, but it's so fucking unhealthy.
He also said something which I think you have knowledge in. He said natural flavors.
Yeah. So
what is that?
So natural flavors, and I'm a huge Anthony Chaffin, Gary Brecker fan. If they started a religion, I would convert to it. They talk about
Anthony Hormozy also.
Yeah, Alex Hormozy.
Alex Hormozy.
Yeah, that guy's the best. He's a god. So fructose. So everyone knows fructose, which is like a branch of a sugar.
Our fructose corn
But
syrup. Yep.
an artificial flavor, which is something that is physically man-made in a lab. Red 40, yellow 5.
Blue dye number 5.
Blue dye number
Yep.
5. Sodium bicarbonate and like all these. If you can't, I'll give you an example, right? So, and I want to get into my diet a little bit in a little while.
We're going right after
so
this.
the bacon that I went into, for example, I thought center cut bacon was the healthiest thing in the world. I used to get it from Boar's Head. There's 17 ingredients to my Boar's Head bacon. The Applegate organic bacon is pork belly, water, and sea salt. And that goes back into same protein count,
Correct.
same carb, same. So, well, who cares? What's the difference? It's the same carb. It's the same calorie count. Let me just eat the one. It tastes a little better. Right. So who cares about the artificial flavor? Well, the artificial flavor, every every cell, right? We have trillions of cells in our body, and you could do your own research on this. Your individual cell is something called mitochondria, which is basically a border around each individual cell that has to be pierced. And going into hydration, shout out to LMNT, which is the best electrolyte that I've taken.
100%.
You could drink water. You're just going to piss it out before you get hydrated because you need to physically pierce the mitochondria. How do you pierce the mitochondria? It's glucose, which is a natural sugar, or an electrolyte. Otherwise, it just breaks off. So when you eat these foods with the artificial flavors, the fructose, which sounds like fructose, very different, cannot pierce the mitochondria. So now you're eating all this artificial shit, and there's tons of analogies where like with poison, you don't have to overdose yourself to die. You could just eat a little bit of poison. You could have one beer over 10 years. One beer a day over 10 years is the same as being a full-blown alcoholic for a month. It's the same poison. So now this fructose, which has 262 different names, by the way.
Natural flavors.
Natural flavors is, there's 262 different legal terms of this fructose. So now you eat this, you're on a low-carb diet, so now there's no glucose at all really piercing the mitochondria. You're losing weight because you're looking good, but your hair's going to also start falling out at some point. The fructose can't pierce the mitochondria, and now it's dormant. It's a man-made product, dormant in your body. The only other thing that is dormant in your body are non-active cancer cells, and they're the only two that fuck with each other. And then you can get to like alkaline and acidic, and that's a whole different conversation. But there's tons, and you can get your own case studies and do your own research on fructose. It's a whole different world of designing these cheaper, same whole foods on paper that look a lot, look identical and are not as healthy for you in the long run. You want to lose that 20 pounds in a month, you're going to lose the 20 pounds. You want to go run that high rocks, you're going to run the high rocks. But if you're 25 and you're still eating that shit at 40, which is now what I'm at, wait till how much, your wrists hurt and your elbows hurt and your knees hurt and you have brain fog and you're depressed, and it comes from those natural flavors. And that's kind of what I want to get into, as I think Taylor hit a really good, how to go about, all right, I've never done anything and I want to do something. So I think that's a decent goal of some calorie counting and getting there. You're getting leaner, you're losing weight. But now for the guy that's out there that's been to the gym for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, wants to up their game, it started with me not a couple years. He died about a decade ago. So I had a friend, Will, that was like just your typical handsome jacked Russian, bro. The guy had the life, very successful, looked like, if you were to compare a car, his body was a Lamborghini, dude. 8-pack. When he died, they did the autopsy, they compared his insides to McDonald's. Yeah. They said it was just garbage. Bullshit. And you would have never, and he was the, Snickers, McDonald's, White Castle, but he calorie counted and he was an IFBB pro and he just knew his shit, and he fucking dropped dead out of nowhere, like 40 years old. So it started
really
getting
out of nowhere though. Or
well, exactly right. So at the time, so I started thinking, and then I read a book called Eat to Live by Joel Fuhrman, who's in bed with like Dr. Oz and a couple guys. He's on the board of Columbian Presbyterian, and I went down this route of, so back up, so I used to coach and used to train lacrosse, and I would do like this genetic test, right? Because every parent thinks their kid's the best. And I'd say, listen, Mr. So-and-so, with all due respect, like, who the fuck are you? Like, why does your kid, you have no other siblings, you work on fucking Wall Street, you've never lifted other than the pen, you've never lifted a sport object in your life, why is your kid the best? And it would kind of give him a little shock. So I was training a kid from East Islip one time, and he's like, oh, well, my sister went to Harvard for lacrosse. I'm like, oh, that's good. The father's like, yeah, I beat stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I said, it's 98% death rate. I said, what? He goes, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, cold turkey, no radiation, no chemo, through supplementation, which we'll bring, I'm not even going to talk about that. We're going to bring the pros on for that, and whole food. Nothing man-made. And this is, my kid's 13, this is 12 years ago. I kind of just put it in my little back burner, started reading the book Eat to Live with Joel Fuhrman, which really goes heavy what you're talking about. It was very vegan pushing, almost like cultish, but it talks about a caloric ratio. But it has 100 pages of every food you could think of, and it's the amount of calories per gram divided by the glucose, the insulin storage before you shit it out, basically. So, and you get a scale of 1 to 100. So on paper, right, the top choices were kale, spinach, bok choy, broccoli. What was on the bottom? Steak, chicken thighs, beef, because technically the amount that you can eat divided by where it stores fills up a lot quicker on the bottom.
Because kale is empty.
Kale is empty.
And
So,
empty
and
nutrition
listen, to this guy, like you were saying, this is for someone who's 500, 600 pounds. He does studies in the book where this guy was 600 pounds and couldn't physically leave a bed, and he made a bowl of salad every week and just ate the salad till he'd throw up. But a guy lost 300 pounds in the first year. So like very extreme, but this show is not really for the 600-pound guy sitting in the fucking hospital bed.
Do you know what kale was used for? But this
Garnish?
is just a fun. Pizza Hut garnish. It was Pizza Hut was the largest
Kale purchaser
in the country up until 2013 for the garnish, and that's what you guys put in your mouth.
And I also want to get to what an oxalate is. So Taylor talked about like this defensive mechanism, which is proven through evolution. So you're this little bunch of kale or a fucking carrot, or, well, it's not carrot because it's in greens, broccoli. Don't pick me. And there's a reason why your 2-year-old puts it in your mouth and goes like that.
Nah.
So when you digest it, there's these little like fiber crystals that you could put under a microscope that actually shred they inflame your intestines. And now your intestine swells, it backs up your stomach, and you're thinking that you're eating healthy, and it's actually making you...
Everyone would know what a kidney stone is.
Exactly,
and
right?
a kidney stone is a ball of crystals, oxalates that you end up having to piss
surgically
out.
remove or get pissed out because it can't go through your
it's
kidney.
like a rock of crystals.
So that's what an oxalate is. So I wanted to go into like the next step. So we had the heavyset guy or someone who knows nothing. But I want to dive into someone who's been in the gym for 5 years. I get asked all the time, you count calories. I counted calories for 12, maybe almost 15 years at one point in my life. I'm just fucking done with it. I'm at the point now where I could eye the food. So I asked Taylor, now I get hurt, and I'm going to throw up a picture here. We're going to edit in what my knee looks like, which is a titanium plate with 7 screws through my knee, no meniscus, no MCL, no cartilage. My knee is fucked. I do all these stem cells. Again, shout out to Dr. Rosado. He'll be on here. Guy made me walk again. Dr. Castro, Rob Pesci. So I get these stem cells and I grow back my leg. You have something called a knee capsule. A knee capsule is where you drain the inflammation, almost like a lymph node through your knee. Your guys would look like piano strings. Mine looks like wet ramen noodles. So now we're training. I'm back at it. I'm in OG. I can never run 2 days in a row. That wasn't even an option. It would take me about 3 or 4 days to recoup. And I'm talking like 1/8 of a mile. So my goal was always to run an 8-minute mile speed for like a quarter mile. I'd end it. So I asked Taylor, I said, bro, I got to change some shit up. Give me some ideas. And we started talking into Whole Foods, and I bought my first pack of eggs from Kate's sister, Gina. And she said to me, I'm letting you know now, you're going to go down a rabbit hole because I know how you are. And when you find out why farm fresh, organic, pasture-free, which is a big difference than caged, egg is so much better than the shit that you buy for a quarter of the price in styrofoam, it's gonna blow your mind. And that's exactly what I did. And I went down the route of, well, why is more expensive, healthier food better? And my next little study was, I'm a big fruit guy. My fruit bill's $450 a week for me and my kids.
Yeah, your kids also,
right?
bro. I've seen the way that they eat fruit,
animals.
dude.
So I look into this strawberry press study, and they took the U.S. non-organic 1 pound of strawberries, and they put it through a commercial press in Europe. It was the juice of the strawberry. So they picked the strawberry, sent it to Europe. Europe put it through a press. They took the strawberry juice. It was 400% the legal pesticide limit of Europe. Mm-hmm. They used the strawberry juice as the pesticide in Europe. So I'm like, all right, this is fucking wild. And I started going down. So I asked Taylor. I've seen him. I was with him when he did the carnivore. Fisk was actually the one that went hardcore with it November. He went straight carnivore, eggs, and fucking cheese. So I started picking my doctor's brain, Taylor's brain, and they said, well, you need a lubricant, which is your fat. Then I look into the Sugar Act of 1960, where they took basically the saturated fat and the glucose or basically sugar, and they did all these different tests, and the sugar was so bad that they paid Harvard to flip the fucking results as the saturated fat being terrible. All right, so now my mind's just blown. So the best tip that I gave Taylor...
That's a fact, by the way.
No, that's a fact. You can
look it up. That's a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory.
I don't even really dive into it because it's you guys to everyone that knows us knows how nuts I am, and let you guys do your own research on it, and you will find it, and then you'll hit us up on DM like, oh, boy, that shit's crazy. You'll see. So I asked Taylor, I said, dude, I got to start getting healthy. Like, give me some options. I'm done calorie counting. Best piece of advice I ever got from Taylor. I was like 260, a little sloppy. He says, pick the weight you want to be and just eat that a day in protein. So I wanted to be 240. If you guys have never counted, that's almost physically impossible to eat in one day. So my goal was like 150 to 180. Now, in the past, I did 6 meals. My macro counts were always like 220 in protein, 250 was a high carb day, and my fat was never over 100, 75 to 100 divided by my 6 meals. I was always taught every 3 hours, which to me made sense. You eat every 3 hours because you want to eat to where you're not fully full, but just where you're still a little hungry, because then your metabolism is faster. That makes sense to me, right? What they weren't telling you is when you eat first thing in the morning, and breakfast is a whole nother fucking invention of bacon and sausage links, which was pushed through a lobbyist group, which I'm not even getting into. But that's the worst thing you can eat because it spikes your glucose and your insulin for the day. And now you're playing catch up, which is why you need a fucking nap. So I'm like, I'm done with all this. And he says, just eat it. So now I skip. I guess technically it's intermittent fasting because I go to bed early. I'm in bed by 8:30. So I have my dinner at 6. And he said, all right, start off with just your protein, and then you're going to eat your fat and then your carb. Eat as much as you want, bro. Eat till you throw up. Just, if you're going to do 200 grams of protein, realistically for someone my size, just, 60 to 75 grams of protein is my 2 meals a day. So I get 150 grams. I sit at my 240. So I do what's 75 grams of protein? That's a 10-ounce ribeye. That's 2 fillets. That's a pound of... I get an organic grass-fed beef with heart and liver in it. That's a pound of poke tuna. It's a nice chunk of meat. He says you eat that first, then eat your fat, and then eat your carb and whatever you want. You never make it to the carb. And that's how I started before this whole whole food journey. And it was just mind-blowing. I'm not stressing out when I'm, I know now if I skip the breakfast and I have like which you do the same schedule, right? You sometimes go once a day.
Yeah, so my food, not to put it on me, my food schedule is I don't eat until 2:30 every day.
In the afternoon, right. So I do 11.
But I also stop eating around 8:30. So I do
so you're like a 2-8.
Yeah, so I do
11,
a long intermittent
11-5.
fast, and then I get my 2 meals if I'm going to have 2 meals. So if I don't eat my 2:30 meal, 6 o'clock is my one giant meal, and I'll probably piss out the excess protein that I'm eating, but I'll have a 2-pound steak.
It comes out of your eyes too, which is annoying.
I'll eat 2 pounds of meat in one sitting.
Just in terms of frequency of eating like that, I think it's for anyone that's like, well, what should I do? Should I eat, breakfast and lunch? Should I eat lunch and dinner? Should I have a couple snacks? Should I eat 6 meals? Should I eat 2 meals? Should I eat 1 meal? It's not that important.
Right, not important. Yeah.
The calories at the end of the day are what's important. Whether you pack them all into one or you spread them out. From a protein standpoint, it's going to make more sense to get a couple bolus doses so you can kind of not get catabolic in a state of breakdown and instead be anabolic in a state of building. So you want to dose a bolus, like maybe 30 grams of protein, maybe several times throughout the day, rather than just saving that all for your 1 meal at the end of the day. But you can do either one and it's going to work. And I think this is where adherence comes in, because the best diet, the one that's going to work, is the one that you're going to be able to follow. So if you're somebody that loves to eat every couple hours, then you can do that. And if you're somebody that doesn't give a shit about breakfast, you like to have a big lunch and a small dinner, you can do that. You're somebody who likes to snack a lot, you can do that. You don't want to, you don't have to. I think at the end of the day, what's really important is the calories.
So you made a comment at the beginning, and again, this is just kind of where you're very, what's the word I'm looking for? You're very good in a sense where you can offer people options objectively, right? I'm a bit more subjective in a sense. You made a comment at the beginning that we're no longer hunter-gatherers, right? Correct. We're not. But the body still works the same way, in my opinion. I feel like we're still meant to eat how hunters and gatherers were back in the day. The only thing that's different now is convenience. I could be wrong, but the whole 6 meals a day, 4 meals a day.
It's fucking a lot, though.
But it's not even that. Again, I've done it. There were days where I was eating 10 cups of rice a day and like 6 ounces of protein with all of. Bro, it's stupid. But I noticed, and for everyone that I speak to who's eating every couple hours, the one thing everyone has in common is, what do you think? They're tired.
Oh, yeah.
They're always tired. And my opinion is because you're constantly insulin spike, insulin spike, insulin spike, insulin spike, crash, crash, crash. So my only, again, this is why I love being on here with him, because as similar as we might be, our point of view might differ sometimes. I would never recommend doing like a 6 meals a day, from having the personal experience, knowing what it does to the insulin spike, having that insulin crash. I feel that the body is just meant to intake 1 meal a day, or maybe the way that they used to, because food wasn't always readily available, every other day. Because that fasting is super important, which we can get into when we bring on the holistic doctors, what it does to the cancer cells and everything like that, and how to eat your own body. That's just my only difference of opinion.
Yeah, no, I just think it's adherence. I think,
I agree.
I think
also,
for some people to go into a calorie deficit diet would be harder for them than to fast for maybe one day throughout the week where they just don't eat anything. And then obviously that creates a big chunk of a deficit of 2,000 or 3,000 calories that they would have otherwise eaten, and then they can spread those calories back out through the other days. But for somebody else, they'll be miserable maybe if they don't eat 100%. For the day, and they maybe have a high-performing job or something like that, and they really feel good when they eat a good breakfast. So I just think it comes down to adherence more so than this way is going to work better for you than that way.
Of course.
Because not everyone, some people will say, I do like having a breakfast. And I'm kind of with you that I prefer actually to not, or if I do, I don't really have my carbs at breakfast because I do feel like I ride that insulin and that blood sugar kind of spike.
You feel that too? You feel like you get a little bit more of
if I have a carb heavy breakfast, for sure, you'll get a big blood glucose spike, and then what's going to come on the other side of that is the dip. And usually when you get the dip is when you have that little crash and you're tired, and then you're probably craving something else that's sweet, so you can get that kind of spike back up again. So I do think sometimes you kind of ride that roller coaster a little bit. But something that's kind of interestingly tied into that is it also matters what you eat these carbs with. So a lot of times when you eat a carb with protein, the blood sugar spike is not as great as it would have otherwise been for the same amount of fruit or sugar that you would have otherwise eaten.
Do you think that has part to do when you talk about eating the protein first? Does that help?
So there's I believe it's still like a hypothesis, but I think it's pretty well supported. But I want to say it would be called the protein satiety hypothesis, where it's almost like there's a level of satiation that you can't reach until you kind of hit a threshold of protein through food. So I just find that you are not really going to store protein as fat. I'm pretty certain that it's physiologically not even really possible to store that protein as fat.
You use that energy right away.
So it's going to be broken into your amino acids, and it's going to be used to support muscle, and it's really like there's not like a physiological pathway where that can get stored like there would be with fat, which is already fat that's going to get stored, or sugar, which will spike insulin and cause storage. So I think the reason that you should eat protein is because it's going to fill you up, and it's not probably going to be stored as fat. But B, I think there's some mechanism to our bodies wanting a certain amount of protein and kind of still having cravings until you get that amount. And then C would be anything that's an animal protein, granted, as long as it's not like a really, really fatty cut of meat, it's not going to be as calorically dense as like a packaged food would be. So say like maybe like a Jimmy Dean egg sandwich or something like that. Which is going to have bread that's been cooked in oil. It's going to have bacon to it, which is a really fatty meat. It's going to have American cheese, which is going to be packed with other things. It's going to have sausage to it. It's going to have eggs to it. And just calorically, it's going to be a really heavy dose for say a 4-ounce kind of sandwich than a 4-ounce chicken or a leaner cut of steak might be. So I try to keep saying reverse engineer the diet, and what I kind of mean is that you want to eat foods that are going to make you full, They're going to give you nutrients, and they're not going to come with tons of calories. And I think on the flip side, those are usually what processed foods are going to be the opposite of. They're going to have lots of calories, they're going to have low nutrition, and you're likely not going to be satisfied after eating them. You're going to be able to eat more of them. And they're also like engineered to be very palate. We crave them. And a lot of times they have
can we go
addicting,
in?
yeah.
Can we go into that for
That's
1 second?
Lay's logo of you can't just have one is an actual patent of a salt to sugar ratio that hits an addiction.
Food scientists are going to look at this and try to find the right profiles.
So
and the
that's
right,
where I wanted to
they
go.
hired him like Marlboro.
So just so everybody knows,
That's a fact. You can fucking
this is
find
a
it all.
fact again. Okay, something that Mike just said, which I'm so happy that he did.
I just read about it.
Oh my God. So all of these major food companies are now owned by ex-cigarette moguls. And what they did over the years, which you started, Mike finished, and now I'm kind of just topping off, they made these high palpable foods super addicting by having a very high carb content, high sugar content, and high salt content. So when you're eating them, your body's actually eating itself to get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. And that is why
never
you,
filled.
you
so something
can't
to
put it
note
down.
in nature is that you would never really find carbs and fats together in the same foods.
Correct.
Fruits would just be carbs.
Yep.
Maybe an avocado or
Unpasteurized cheese
and
and
they just have fats.
Shit, I
so
never
you really
realized
never
that.
find them together, and those are the most palatable, delicious foods when you mix together peanut butter and jelly or anything
So
that's
good.
fatty
Uncrustables.
and sugary, bread and butter.
Yeah.
Any carbs and fats that are mixed together are going to be very, and kind of going back to our like hunter-gatherer, we didn't really know when our next calories were going to come from. So we're encouraged to eat these really calorie dense foods because, oh great, we can store a lot of this and this is really high in calories, and there's kind of a reason why we crave that stuff and why it tastes so good, because I don't think our bodies at this point understand that in the modern day the convenience of food is, I mean, even with DoorDash and things now, like you can have whatever you want whenever you want, and that's just not the way that it was before. So previously it would have been very advantageous to try to mix those things together, versus now that just makes for a dangerous situation, because you're almost never going to have an off switch. It's just going to taste really, really good, and
All
it's
the
going to have the
time.
right combinations of things that
was the
really
hardest
keep you kind of craving those things. And they're really just not found in nature. So you're right. Like, there are legitimately food scientists that design these things so that we enjoy them
just have
and
one.
they taste delicious to us. And
Fuck Lay's.
yeah, they don't satisfy us. There's not vitamins in Lay's chips.
Right.
They do add vitamins to bread and wheat and sometimes like chips
But
and
even
things
the
like that.
bread. But I want to use bread I want to pull up.
As he's
Like,
pulling this
yeah.
up, the whole thing about bread, and I think this is what I really also want to get across to people, because I just grazed over it before. Folic acid, all right, is sprayed on every single wheat and grain in the United States. Let me not say every. 90%. If you look at the ingredients on something and you go to the back of like a cookie container or a bread pouch, it will say enriched
Mostly
wheat flour.
all of the wheat is enriched.
And what that means is that scientists and all these different farmers have gathered together and they've now sprayed their crops with folic acid. Now, everyone knows folic acid. It's in these multivitamins that go into pregnant women's bellies. We don't need folic acid. It is a scientific fact. Again, look it up, that only 40% of not the nation, but the world, 40% of the world can only break down folic acid in our system. Otherwise, it's super inflammatory for our gut
Yeah, this
health.
goes back into the methylation, and it goes back into the forms of these nutrients, because you want methylfolate and not, it's a different form of the same thing. So usually they would add folic acid, they would add
Everything.
artificial vitamins that were synthesized in labs. They would add iron, which is the iron shaving iron, not the heme iron that you would find in animal products. And as a conspiracy theorist in a lot of ways, I don't know really
Conspiracy
many other
factualist.
times where they tried to help us, where they, meaning
They never
government
did, bro.
and
There's no way.
higher ups in food.
Why
I
would
don't know
they?
when they ever tried to help us for
Anything
free.
that's
so,
good for you, they don't want you to
so they're
have.
putting
'cause
this
that's
stuff
how
in our
they
food
wind up
for
losing
free.
money.
They're enriching it
Yeah, okay.
so that they can support our health.
Blowing up chicken farms.
But realistically,
and
it's-
Before you read, hold on. Before you read whatever's on your phone, when you were going back to this whole, you know what? I just lost my fucking train of thought. Shit! Oh my god!
I
As
just
fast
want-
as that went in, it went out. Go.
I just want to show this is exactly. I want to touch on the reason. One of the main reasons I ever wanted to do the podcast that got me personally excited was over a dozen. I had my boy Mike, bro, was crippled with rheumatoid arthritis to the point where like he was going to retire and possibly go to fucking hospice. He bought me $1,000 knife set as a thank you. The guy is back to working every day. He's healthier than he's ever been. He's off all his medication.
Wow.
I've seen 2 people cure gout and a bunch of chronic illnesses. And this is my own personal opinion, is I think it is the lack of processed food, which we'll get into. What do you mean processed food? I'm gonna give you an example. Everyone knows what a fucking Martin hamburgers roll is,
Yes,
right?
they're the best.
The packet in big lettering. Why is this the perfect bread? It's soft and tastes great. No high fructose corn syrup. No artificial dyes. No trans fats. Non-GMO. Let's read the ingredients.
Read it.
Unbleached enriched wheat flour.
Folic acid.
Ferrous folate.
Right, which is iron.
niacin, which just so you know is what you take post 9/11.
There are multiple forms of it. Some may be good for you, but others
That's
not.
true too.
Yeah.
All right, so now I won't say that because maybe there's.
But no, all of these forms that they're putting
the
in
niacin
are
I used
not.
to take was to flush the fucking
They're shit.
asbestos
They're
out of my
shit
skin
source
in
yeah.
a sauna.
Right.
Okay?
Which like again, there's multiple kinds, and some of them may be more beneficial than others. but-
thiamine, folic acid, non-fat milk, reconstituted potato, yeast, sugar, cane sugar, wheat gluten, sunflower oil,
Up.
2% or less of the following: salt, butter, dough conditioner, monoglyceride, diglyceride, phosphorate, monocalcium phosphorate, calcium propionate, guar gum, absorbent acid, datum, calcium, sulfate, turmeric coloring, annatto color, and sesame seeds.
Wait, hold on. What brand is that?
Martin's.
Martins,
Fuck
which
you,
is actually
Martins.
probably better than
It is the better of the
Wonder
better. So
and-
now I cut this
Wonder
out
is
for all. I didn't do any bread for almost 6 months. I get now organic sourdough bread, which, by the way, not to get into the conspiracy theories, but if you read, I don't even watch the news, but I know it's been on where they're trying to shut down the Amish.
Yes.
That is something called stone mill flour. It is the purest, non-bleached organic flour in the world. And they also sell raw milk, which is from the fucking cow, non-refrigerated, to your fucking doorstep, are both illegal in Pennsylvania as we speak, and they're trying to outlaw and shut these villages down. All you get, so I went from that bread, I was swollen, I couldn't run. We ran 5 30-minute miles at 300 meters a clip in class last.
Yeah.
And I had no swelling, no inflammation. And I want to post a picture. It's a little thotty, but it's going to be my before and after of 30 pounds different of just cutting out. Instead of eating this, going into the healthier,
Right.
is
because the ingredients of the sourdough bread
homemade
are wheat,
starter
water,
kit, and salt.
and
Yeah.
maybe butter or an egg or
Yeah.
something.
yeah, and sea salt.
Yeah.
So, and that's all we eat. And I
Right.
eat it by the pounds.
My brain just had that moment of clarity again. So you just rejogged what I wanted to say. Anything that is healthy for you will never be considered a moral outlet for any of these major pharma food companies to wind up wanting to get behind. So to go back into how they're trying to outlaw that, do you know what the American Diabetes Association prescribes for a diabetic?
Wasn't it Lucky Charms?
Bro, cereal, okay? Lucky Charms
Yeah,
is one
I
of
think Milky
them,
Way was on there.
okay? A bowl of oatmeal, which, by the way, is riddled with glyphosate, which is a huge carcinogen,
You know
okay?
what oatmeal came from? It came from the Romans. That's what the peasants ate because there was limited whole foods in the villages. So the kings
Grains are
and
easy to
queens
grow and
got
they're easy to
the
feed-
the
give people
steaks
calories.
and the fish.
Well, that's where salads came
and the
from
peasants
also. It's
got the
peasant
oatmeal.
food. Yeah, okay, so peasants. And then a glass of orange juice.
Yeah,
Where it's all sugar. And you want to
not
know what that
organic
does?
because you got me on the healthy orange juice, but I drink the shit. I drink 32 ounces a day and I lose weight.
Do you want to know what that diet does? It spikes your insulin, making you insulin dependent on the medication that they're prescribing you. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how brainwashed all of us, myself included, once were to fall into the trap of all these big companies that just want to royally fuck us at the end. So what's going on in Pennsylvania, I saw, is absolutely
Wild, bro.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
And
Even
also,
raw milk. Go to a farmer's market in Babylon, Lindenhurst, Sayville. Go to the vegetable stand and ask for raw milk, and they're gonna go like this. Shh, 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 shh. We don't sell that. We don't sell that. And you gotta go on the side like, listen, get me 2 gallons next week. Here's $20. Bring me the fucking fresh shit. It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
Yeah. So maybe if we can pivot back into, you asked the question before about, all right, somebody's already doing kind of good. Like, what do you recommend for them? And I think if we had to basically re-engineer the food pyramid, you kind of just flip it upside down.
I think this is the overall goal of today's podcast is this. I feel like the majority of people are where you're at right now. What would you tell them?
Right. So I would make sure my plate has a good bolus source of protein to it, which would
and what's
be
a protein?
red meat, poultry.
You think there's a big difference between the grass-fed organic and not if you can afford it? Or do you think it's all the same shit?
From a weight loss standpoint, no.
Okay.
From a healthy standpoint, yeah.
well, why don't we speak to the common folk rather
Correct.
than...
Which I think it's just calling it steak is better than saying you need to eat grass-fed. Because I do think those things happen in steps.
Yep.
When you can create a good plate and it's not sourced the best, it's way easier to start sourcing those things better than it is to look at a plate and say, I can't eat any of that, and now I need to make my plate look like this. So I think a stepwise approach is much more realistic.
So can you list some of the
what's
proteins out?
You get some cool shit. So you got like, you
you
got your ground beef.
Yeah, you have any ground meat, so ground beef, ground turkey, ground chicken. You have steaks, any sort of cuts of steaks that you enjoy, which I think would be, it's basically just based on preference. I like ribeye and New York strip, and I like brisket. I like porterhouse, which is a strip and a filet mignon. But I think just finding basically what you like, and then there's going to be a little caveat into how much fat is going to come with that meat, which I think is not the most important to focus on in the beginning, because for me, your plate should really have that good dose of protein to it. Obviously, bigger person, more protein. Smaller person probably needs less.
Fish is okay.
Say that again.
Fish is okay.
Fish is probably a necessary part.
Tuna.
I think there's going to be some things that you get in fish.
Or more fattier fish, like a salmon with all your high omega-3s and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think DHA and is like the forms of fat that you can find in seafood are going to be really beneficial for
because then you also have something
and,
like tilapia, which almost has no nutrition value.
Correct, and this goes back into our conversation about healthy versus lean, and I think in concept, fish is, we actually used to make all of our civilization around waterways because we'd be able to get fish, and that was an important source of food. Now, unfortunately, the waters are very polluted with mercury and microplastics and so on and so forth. So you do maybe have to be a little bit careful about eating lots of canned tuna and maybe just fish in general. But yeah, so fish, would say essentially any, I would think would be a good place to start.
Also, just branching off of something that Taylor is saying about fish, I know that we're not pushing the organic grass-fed for the beef. When it comes to your fish, though, be very careful about farm-raised and wild-caught. I think that's very important.
I would say for a lot of fish, but not for every fish. For something like maybe like an oyster, it's not, they just grow them on a farm.
But for salmon.
But for something like a salmon where they're going to add in fake coloring to them, and they're going to feed them garbage. They're going to possibly give them antibiotics in their feed.
That vital choice that you put me on.
So wild caught fish is definitely going to be better, but I think for someone that's starting, I would just say start to incorporate more fish, more shellfish, shrimp, scallops, and
so that's your protein.
Right. So you want to have your protein,
eggs,
and then eggs are great. I would put them in they're not, I don't think necessary, but I think when you actually look at an egg, it is jam-packed with nutrition.
So nutritionally dense.
It's meant to grow a life, basically. It's meant to grow an animal out of it. So I do think that they're like nutritional powerhouses. I would say, based on preference, whether some people can't tolerate eggs, and I wouldn't say, all right, it's so important that you start eating eggs. But yeah, I would say they're great. They would be probably in that big foundation of the pyramid. So I would say animal products would be in that big bottom of the pyramid of as far as where most of your nutrition is going to come from. And then in that next tier is probably your carb sources, or the rest of your calorie. I mean, people do carnivore, so that some people make meat the whole pyramid.
Yeah.
I like to be a little bit more balanced. I think you want to be able to enjoy life a little bit. So I think cutting out food groups isn't the most easy to adhere to for a lot to.
Way more advanced.
Correct. Yeah. I think you have to be very, very disciplined.
But for someone that's just watched this, doesn't even know what a fucking carb is, like what's some of your top
I would just
carbs?
say get them from real food sources. So I would say rice and potatoes would be your
fruits.
Your biggest two. Fruits.
I'm a food whore, bro.
Honey maple syrup, like natural sugars like that. But yeah, more good bread I would put in that category as well.
Homemade sourdoughs, local bakeries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your fat is, if you're eating the right sources of animal protein, you're mostly going to get your fats
already in there.
It's going to be packaged with them.
Right. If you wanted some extra fat, you have avocado.
Right, so plant fats would be more like olives, avocados. You'll get some fat from cheese and whole fat milk and cream.
You also have nuts, but be careful with the nuts because it's 1 billion calories.
I just think nuts go back into our argument as before. Nuts don't want to be eaten. They're quite literally a seed. A lot of times they're meant to. They have hard shells. They're meant to protect themselves, and they're a lot of times filled with more defense chemicals. And if we go backwards a little bit, we especially prepared a lot of these foods in such a way where we got rid of a lot of these defense chemicals by soaking them, sprouting them, fermenting them. So something like beans, like if you eat raw beans, they're toxic for you. People die each year from eating beans, but if you soak and sprout and ferment the beans, they can to me be a good source of carbs, and you get some protein with them, and you could get some minerals, and I think fiber could be. I don't know that it's as essential as it's made out to be, but I do think fiber can help with your gut motility and keep you having regular bowel movements and keep you fuller. So I'm reluctant to include some of those foods because you are supposed to prepare them in such a way rather than just eating them raw. But I don't think by any means they're essential, like a nut or a seed or any necessarily plant foods aren't probably the most essential things that you can eat. But to me, I just view those as things that might make the meal better. There are vegetables that I enjoy when they're cooked how I like them to be, or seasoned and added. Usually you have to add fat and seasoning to most vegetables, I think, to make them actually taste good. That's going back to the kid thing. If you could give kids raw vegetables, raw broccoli or something like that, they're
wild.
Usually not going to like it. But you kind of roast it and you salt it and season it, and maybe add some cheese on it, or just create different flavor profiles with it. I think there's no reason that you should really fear them. I don't want to spread fear around vegetables. But I do think that those aren't going to be the things that really give you your nutrition. They're gonna make it more adherable to eat that animal-based diet. So it's like even Paul Saladino is somebody that I had followed for a long time, and if you followed him, you've kind of seen how he's changed his tune a little bit. From it was just meat previously, no dairy, and then it was just meat and some organs, and then it was just meat and organs and cheese, and now it's meat and organs and cheese and lots of fruit and sugars.
The fruit is huge.
I think for an active person, again, going back to there's no essential carbohydrate like there is an essential fat and essential amino acid from protein, but our bodies do readily utilize carbohydrate as an energy source for the brain. And I think if you're going to make it anyway in an costly energy process, you might as well just eat them. And I think you probably want to get them from better sources like natural fruits and natural sugars like honey and maple syrup and things that would come from the earth. But I'm also of the opinion that a man-made fat would be way worse than a man-made sugar would be, because for the most part, we're just going to burn our sugars, and fats we're really going to almost create our cell membranes and things from them. So I do think it's much more important that your fat sources are coming from animals rather than
that's good to know.
Sugars at the end of the day, and even all those sources of like I said, rice and potatoes, they're really broken down into the same glucose and fructose. They just have different ratios to them, and they are going to get utilized a little bit differently. Like they have different glycemic indexes, which would be how much it's going to spike your blood glucose. But otherwise, I think especially if you're active, then the fear of sugar is also overblown, because for the most part, that's going to be readily used fuel.
Right.
And even a table sugar is really I think it's almost 1-to-1 or 1-to-0.8 or whatever the ratio is, but it's a glucose to fructose molecule. It's sucrose. But at the end of the day, most of those sugars are just going to get broken down into their simplest forms anyway. So I do think it's a little overblown, our fear of it. But what's important to note that if you want to get lean, sugars are going to be very calorie dense. Like an 8-gram teaspoon, 2 teaspoons of sugar is 8 grams of it's pure carbohydrate. So when you're eating out, a lot of times they're going to make the food taste really good by adding lots of sugars and sweeteners to it and adding lots of fats. And usually that just ends up being bad fats. But I think the problem with them is that they're very edible. They're very palatable. And we don't really have an off switch for sugar. Like you can kind of just keep eating it, until the point where you're maybe even like sick. But you have, I think, I like to think that we have a natural regulator for salt, where if you eat some salt, it will taste good at first, but if you continue to eat that salt, it's going to start to be like the end of a bag of pretzels or something, where you're just like, oh my god, So I think we have a natural system where we do crave salts, and then we kind of have a natural off switch that's built in as well that will kind of get turned off to salt. Whereas carbohydrate and sugar, going back to our survival mechanisms, our bodies kind of just are like, sweet, good, like keep eating sugar because we'll keep storing that stuff for later because I'm not sure when our next meal is going to be. And that helped previously because if you stumbled upon some wild berries or something like that, you could really kind of binge out on them and store that stuff for later. Versus now you can get sugar at the snap of a finger, like whenever you want to. So I think the problem with sugar is how edible it becomes, not necessarily the sugar itself. And I'm sure if we can get some specialists on eventually, they would maybe break down why you should be a little bit fearful of processed sugar more so than like a natural fruit sugar. But I think for somebody that's starting out, if you are not consuming extra sugars from non-foods, then you're pretty safe to eat as much fruit as you want. And at the end of the day, you're not probably going to get very much sugar from it and much calories from it. You can eat. I get frozen fruit a lot just because I like
favorite.
it.
Target has the best bags.
You can eat the whole bag of frozen fruit. It's like 300 calories, and you can eat a small bag of Skittles that would give you more calories than that fruit would. So that's to me where the problem lies. It's just the how dense that sugar is kind of packed into that little Skittle versus the amount of sugar, because fruits also have fiber and water and some minerals to it that can also help you make you more full. But I think for somebody that's starting out, conceptually, if you do shift your focus onto whole foods, you can probably more or less eat as much of them as you want, and it's pretty unlikely that you would be gaining weight from it.
100%. 100%.
And that's the point I want to make.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think that's the biggest thing that I got with the diet was like, sugar, I can't eat fruit, I can't have sugar. And I'm like, well, you're putting stevia in your fucking Starbucks. It's the same shit. And I just think that even if it was the same on paper, gram for gram, the fruit, like God's diet, and it was produced to be edible, and the sugars are naturally there from the earth for you, which I think is different which again, doesn't matter to the beginning stage, but getting like as healthy as you can, which I think really helps you. I mean, I cleared, like those little floaters in your eyes. I have zero now. Yeah. I have the brain fog. I was doing methyl blue drips quarterly, a year. Like I haven't gone for one in 6 months. I haven't gone for any glutathione NAD drips, and my LDL's still down. My liver enzymes are down. Like my whole life is turned around, and the swelling, is night and day. And I really think it was more on like the whole food side.
So trying to tie back into my importance, I think, of calories, because I think a lot of people, even just saying switch to whole foods, I think a lot of people would have a hard time just all of a sudden switching to whole foods because they're not, you're used to eating a lot of foods that are not whole foods. Right. So I do think that making swaps is probably the quickest way that you can get yourself lean and get yourself healthy. And then I think from there you can start to incorporate whole foods instead of those food sources. Right. But if you just look from a pure calorie standpoint, I think bread has something like 25 grams of carb per slice. So when you eat a sandwich, you're getting 50 grams
right
of
off the rip of
carb from two slices of bread. Yeah. the reason why switching to whole food is going to work better is because you can eat a lot of volume in
7
potato
apples. Yeah.
to get, and fruit to get that same, you
you'll
know,
throw
you can
up.
eat that whole bag of fruit and it would be like eating 4 slices of bread,
Right.
which is way more palatable than you're going to get
Way
halfway
more
through that bag of fruit and you're
satiating,
like,
Yeah, you probably
I'm
shit
pretty
yourself
good,
too,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, like you're getting a lot of fiber and you're pretty good. So I do, you mentioned stevia. I don't like to just right off the bat demonize artificial
Right.
sweeteners because they are really, it's really supported that in the reality of it that those beginning swaps are probably going to be really, really helpful for a lot of people. So
Right.
even drinking, I get the vanilla sweet cream cold brew, which is 70 calories, I think, in the grande size. And I used to get the vanilla sweet cream cold foam cold brew, which is 320
Right.
calories for the
a
grande
major
size.
difference.
It's just a small swap, and someone might still look at the ingredient profile of some of the things that they're putting in that cream to sweeten it or whatnot, and you might kind of demonize it. But to me, those are the realistic swaps that someone would be able to make, and that's why I think calorie counting can be really important as a first step. So usually my first advice is actually don't change anything that you're eating. Just
start
start
counting
to
it.
track the
What's some numbers
calories.
that you would tell someone? I know it's based on size, but the general person, is probably between 5'5" and 6 foot. They're probably between $160 and $250. Like, is there like a general number that they can go off of on?
I
a
would
total
actually say
calorie
don't
count
worry
or-
about the number so much in the beginning, just because your body's mostly going to keep you at maintenance and
Go by feeling.
you'll
Like,
probably be in a
feeling?
little bit of an excess of calories because I think just statistically people do tend to gain like maybe a pound or 2 per year over the course of your life, and you just kind of get a little bit bigger each year because of the hyper palatability like of a lot of foods. But I would say initially just track what you eat. You don't even have to make any sort of changes, and then you're going to start to become aware of like kind of the trade-off that some of the, I love that Ben and Jerry's at night, and then you start to realize, damn, that's 1,300 calories
Right.
that I'm getting in
3
the pint
times a
there.
week, yeah.
And even if I swap that to a Halo Top, which I'm not saying is a health food by any means, but I can kind of eat a pint still, but now I'm only getting 400 calories instead of 1,300. And what are some of the other swaps that I might be able to make? And then that goes back. All right, instead of maybe the cola, I can drink the Diet Cola, and instead of maybe the fried chicken, I can have the grilled chicken,
that's a
and
good
maybe I can find a lower calorie carb source instead of like that hoagie that I like to eat. Maybe I can kind of switch that into like a lettuce wrap. And I think a lot of times you'll find yourself eating the same kind of foods. It doesn't really feel like you've made major changes, but the changes are significant enough that they're going to help you start to lose weight. And then I think when you get somebody they've now like lost the weight that they wanted to lose, they're going to start to say like, all right, how can I take this a step further? And then they're going to start to look at what's in the diet soda and what's in the low carb bread that I'm eating. And like, all right, how can I swap these for more like whole food sources and better sources? And maybe I can swap the candy for fruit. And I think a stepwise approach is really what's going to realistically work a lot better than looking at your plate and saying throw all that shit away, go into your pantry, throw all that shit away, only buy steak, only buy chicken and seafood, only buy fruit. I think that will come with time, because when you start to get leaner and you start to feel yourself having more energy and more clarity and not so bogged down, and you're sleeping better and you're nicer and you're not as irritable and you're not getting the crashes that you used to eat, you'll probably naturally start to kind of educate yourself a little bit more and then try to take it to the next level and the next level and the next level. And then I think for all of us, it's hard because we're here now, but you forget how you
Where you
got
were,
here.
yeah, 100%.
And I think that was all of our paths, was to take it one step at a time and open your eyes to one thing at a time. And then you get to the point where you want to do better and I feel this good now. What if I
How
do
can I
this?
feel
I might
better?
even feel even better
Yeah.
if I start to do this. And you start to get to a place of really wanting to nourish yourself rather than just counting calories so I can stay lean. And I do think like a balanced approach is probably more realistic for the average person than just saying like cut out carbohydrates completely. And to further, I just don't think that you even need to do that. I think that you can, so long as you're going to kind of keep things in check, which you wouldn't know what in check means until you have an awareness of what's on your plate and where those calories are coming from. But I think those are going to be the really big movers for getting you started on a journey where you find yourself a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line now looking at your plate and being like really proud of how much thought you put into nourishing yourself and trying to support your highest self rather than just looking at it purely from a standpoint of like weight loss or weight gain. And I think that's where kind of like the bodybuilding goes wrong, and the calorie counting, I think, can get very you can get very anal about, again, like tracking every single thing that you eat. And I think that's probably the biggest downside of the calorie counting, is that you can get maybe like in a little bit of an unhealthy relationship with food. But I do think that, again, not even changing what you eat. I just think having an awareness of what you eat, and then figuring out how you can kind of, it's like a game, you know, calories. It's like you have a budget and an allowance. And if you can, in the beginning, I'm like, eat whatever you want and just make it fit this budget. And then you start getting kind of creative with making swaps, and you realize it's not so bad to eat healthy so long as I mix flavors the right way, and I can make my meals really just as palatable. I can eat a steak and mashed potatoes, and I can still kind of end up in a calorie deficit, and I can eat way more than I used to eat. And I just think that those are the big movers that are going to probably make more realistic change than like the perfection diet, the optimal diet that kind of falls apart in the face of our modern day being able to eat whatever you want. And even when we drive home from here, we're going to pass like 37 different food options that would be able to derail us. So I think eating is a it's, you know, maybe you're awake for 18 or 16 hours out of the day. It's like a 16-hour challenge for you to kind of stay away from, you know, if you watch TV, you're going to get commercials, you're going to see billboards as you're driving, you're going to pass restaurants, you're going to have friends that kind of like try to suck you into eating shit. So I do think you have to be like very vigilant with staying on your guard for eating. And it really is tough. It's not just about one meal or one day. It's got to become, I know it's cliche, but it's got to become really like a lifestyle if it's going to work. Everyone, I'm sure, knows either themselves or someone that's crash dieted, and they go down, they lose it, but then they go back onto what they were doing and they gain it. And there's a reason that stuff doesn't work, because you need to find the way to make that diet less of what feels like a diet and more of what just feels like, you know, a good way of eating. And I think a lot of that for me came from starting to understand calories, and starting to make these swaps, and then you further your sourcing of things. And so that would be like my bigger advice, is just start to understand what's on your plate. I think you liked the piece of advice that I gave to you, would be really start focusing on your protein. Yeah, that was really hard to eat shitty when you're focusing on protein. And you started,
I started swapping out the can of tuna for the fillet,
right, and the shitty bacon for the good bacon, and all those things are going to make you feel even better and want to do other things that are going to further that process. And I think people underestimate.
I think your answer was fucking perfect for someone. Again, he always breaks his shit down to like a 5-year-old, which I think is nothing better. And what's even further that is, I want to bounce this back to the mental health standpoint for someone that came from, that darkness. And we talk about, you're going to hear us say it 1,000 times is, if you want to change, you have to just change. So now you're sitting there and I want to change. Well, what do I do? Now you have some gym options. Now you have your diet. And I think the diet, and you just kind of went into it at the end, is it's way more than just a diet. It's now a lifestyle. I got chills. So I know I'm fucking what I'm talking about now. It's a whole lifestyle, and it's discipline, it's patience, it's self-love, it's self-care. And you do have, we're also rolling off of the Alex Wolf episode where, maybe you want to sacrifice something for 30 days. And we could roll that into the spiritual aspect of it, of, what I want to do. And it has to be something that you want. So, and it's hard. I'm doing this shit for 15 years. It's still, I fluctuated from 280 to 220 in a year. I love a fucking McDonald's cheeseburger with mac sauce. Yeah, I love a Taco Bell Mexi Melt. I love a fucking Chick-fil-A sandwich.
If you don't know, it's ignorance, but when you know and then you make the wrong decision, you know you were making the wrong decision, it's negligence at that point.
Exactly.
But you know how to get back on track.
Exactly. And also as a father show, like, dude, you have, whoever's listening now with kids, and like maybe you're in shape now because you're active and you're working, you're going to retire soon. And if you don't have that lifestyle, like I'm having my 5th kid, and I'm just now, over the last 3 years, able to like play some lacrosse with my 13-year-old. I play baseball every day with Jax. I'm running around with Brody. We're back to doing our walks, so I can fucking walk every morning when it's sore. Like if you don't take care of yourself now, and it's a hard decision now, it's going to be a harder decision later when you can't get out of your fucking bed, or your neck hurts, or your shoulder aches. How many people I hear my knees? Dude, you're 25. Who gives a fuck about your knees? Like, change your shit now, because when you're 40, it's going to be that much worse. And I think the word lifestyle, it's so cliche, but it's how you start the change. And I think the diet is one of the best. Like I said, other than the gym, the diet was one of the best things I ever.
So I think as this goes on, hopefully we'll have like a lot more health professionals on here, because I think knowledge is power, and 100%. I think the more that you know, then you can really start to make more educated decisions, and you start to look at that bread and you're like, oh man, but I know like the freaking folic acid and the iron and all this enriched and this bleached wheat and shit like that, I know it's not good for me. And it's way easier to make that good decision when you're like looking at that piece of bread and you're like, that's fatigue and lethargy and me being cranky and sleeping like shit, my knees aching, versus me, I understand now, and it's way easier to make that decision, because I think everyone knows, oh, you just have to eat healthy, and that's not enough to sway you away from making a poor choice. I think once you really start to understand more of the nuance and the mechanism as far as why these things are harmful and why other things are healthy and they're going to support you, then that becomes more of a driving force for you to make better decisions.
Also, like once you really start to feel,
it's the best.
Once you start to actually just feel healthy, when I felt sick for 10 years, and there was a running joke between me and my boys that I was friends with back then. I always felt like I was dying. I couldn't understand why. When you finally get to wake up in the morning and the first word out of your mouth isn't fuck, and your bones aren't cracking, and you just feel good, you don't want to stop after that. And that is, I think, the most important thing. So it becomes a lifestyle, and it just becomes a sense of joy after that. It starts with what Taylor said last episode of knowing your why, finding out your why. And your why for starting this diet, it might just be to feel good for the first time in God knows how long. And I think that's super important. If there's anything that we can implore you guys to do after listening to this episode, do your research. Do your research on everything that we said. Some of it sounded funny. Some of it sounded conspiratorial. But at the end of the day, you are your own knowledge dealer. You can do whatever you want with everything that's accessible at your fingertips. Look things up. Figure it out. Figure what works best for you at the end of the day, and you take it from there. And once you start to
I'd add, too, just give it a little bit of time.
Yeah, give it time.
It's not one meal. It's not one day.
It's like Mike said,
1 week.
It's 100 days
give it a little bit of time.
Gym,
Probably 2 weeks, 4 weeks, you're going to start to really feel it.
Give it time, have patience, and like Alex said in the last episode, have faith.
Yeah.
Have faith that everything's going to work out, and eventually you're going to feel good. And when you start to feel good, you're going to look good. And when you look good, you're going to feel a certain type of way where you can go into a room, command the room, and then you know what your value and what your worth is at the end of the day. And it all starts with these little tiny micro tips that we get. Again, this isn't bro science. This isn't for three meatheads to sit up here and say, eat steak or do this. Find something that makes you feel good at the end of the day. And if you're not eating something good, you're not going to feel good. And then that taps into everything else in your life.
And bouncing back to the fatherhood aspect of it, I know a lot of people reached out asking, like, well, how do I acquaint myself with my kid? And I missed this part of his life. How do I get back in? I would have, if you would have told me, change your diet and make it, I would have fucking laughed in your face. I probably would have spit on you for thinking it was like disrespectful for thinking you knew what you're talking about. Total game changer. How many times we bring my kids to the gym and they're really trying to lift, and then I started, I'm a little bit super anal with the diet, way more advanced, but I learned that with that came the patience and the connection with my two sons, that they now understand what a protein is. And listen, my kid wants to cheat and have mac and cheese. He's 6. He will go and say, I know mac and cheese isn't healthy, but I'll make up for it. I'll take 2 hard-boiled eggs with yolk, or he'll want 2 servings of lactose-free cottage cheese. He likes the Comté cheese and the Tenaglia. Like, it's changed everything. And I didn't realize that, 9 months down the road, my son wakes up, my 5-year-old will say, hey, Dad, what are we doing today? If I have to go to work, he puts on a collared shirt and jeans. If we go to the gym, he puts on his OG clothes. And it just made the connection so special, because when you do get to that next level of health where you're teaching them and trying to like really groom them, you think it's going to be like pulling teeth, and they experience it where it's like your own secret bond. And what solidified that or validated it was my Father's Day, where I was crying like a fucking emotional wreck because I went to the Father's Day thing and it was like, my dad's 45 and like everything is wrong. But you know what's his favorite thing to do? Share fruit with my dad. You know what I mean? And it for all those guys out there struggling, you want to change your life. You want to reconnect with your kids. Show them the patience. Like my dinner takes an hour and a half to fucking make sometimes. By the time you're cooking the steak or the ground beef and you're running outside and you're slicing up the fruit and you're grinding the cheese, like grating the cheese, your kids will appreciate it and they'll realize the patience that you're taking the time out of your day to make their food. And it's a lot more of a bonding experience than you think. And I just don't want to neglect that to all the fathers that have, been through some shit and want to reconnect with their kids. Start with the gym and the diet with them and learn with them. You're just as ignorant as they are and learn it together and see what they like, see what they like. They'll understand the pizza cheat meal and why they're only getting it once a day. And I highly recommend trying that route and reach out to us, TikTok, Instagram, use whatever it is with questions and experiences. I love the feedback on it because it's one of the major stepping stones that changed my life.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. I know Mike said he never wanted to end on another note after last week, but we're ending on that note, dude.
Thanks for listening.
Look, will you be absolutely genuine with me? No deception, please. I want you to do something that expresses you without the slightest deception.